we are moving from and shifting gears almost, we're moving from the film industry to talking about women and money and entrepreneurship. Women do mean business. If you look at the headlines, you will see all manners of female leaders at the helm of some of our biggest, most important companies. Women-led startups are becoming more and more common. Women CEOs are becoming more and more common. And you would think that women are everywhere. And yet, you might be shocked if I tell you that female labor force participation has actually gone down in India. Put into simple layperson language, that actually means that fewer Indian women are working than before. Our labor force participation is now under 27%, and this has been a declining curve. There was a decade that has been marked by data scientists that show that 20 million Indian women actually dropped out of the workforce. That's at one end of the spectrum. But there are other numbers too. At 2%, India ranks the third lowest in the Asia Pacific with regards to female CEO representation. So there's a lot of talk about how do you get more women in boardrooms, how do you get more diversity. Women account for 48% of entry-level hires, but only 38% of first-level managers. So you'll get a lot of this data flying at you and coming your way. And I don't know what to make of it. There have been moves to allow for affirmative actions in boardrooms, but there's also hope. There's also numbers that now say that 15.7 million women-owned enterprises, which represent about 20% of total enterprises, is the number that we have when we talk about female entrepreneurship. Talking about what we mean when we say women mean business, whether women-run companies are different, and whether women have a really complicated relationship with money, especially when it comes to asking for money. We're joined by three fascinating women today. Let's bring them up. Roopa Kudva is the managing director of Omidyar in India, funds a lot of these ventures and has been a sort of inspiration for so many women herself. We're also joined by Upasana Taku. Upasana Taku went from being an engineer to an entrepreneur, and now leads as the co-founder of MobiQuick. And Rashmi Daga, who's the entrepreneur who created Fresh Menu, who's also by coincidence an engineer before she became an entrepreneur. So this is really a panel of tough women. And I'll start with you, Roopa. I mean, today you're running Omidyar in India and the region, and you're deciding what to fund, what not to fund. But you've worked with CRISIL before. You serve on all manners of boards. How much has changed and how little has changed?
I think if I were to look back, I've been working now for over 30 years, Barkha, and a lot has changed, but there is still such a long way to go. And let me try just talking about, when we talk about women in entrepreneurship, how serious is the problem? So just look at some numbers. Today it's estimated that there are about 8 million women entrepreneurs and 50 million male entrepreneurs. Last year, only 6.5% of the startups that were funded by the VC industry were women-founded or women co-founded. And only 1/5 of the VC investors in India last year funded enterprises, funded startups which were founded by women. So I think where entrepreneurship is concerned, I think there's a long way to go. Corporate India is concerned, I think it's somewhat different. There are some sectors like financial services where we have seen a whole slew of women rising to the top. The average proportion of women in financial services and broadly in corporate India now is about a third. There has been some there, but on balance, I would say, progress, yes. I mean, when I started my career and would go for factory visits, there were no toilets for women. So I think from there we've come a long way. But I think the wonderful women we have on this panel here, Upasana and Rashmi, are of another generation altogether, and I think they're really charting new frontiers.
Yeah. Roopa, that data is really interesting. 8 million female entrepreneurs to 50 million male entrepreneurs. Why do you think that is? And I want to talk about the politics of the bathroom and the workspace later in the program because it is so important. It's like rendering women invisible in the system. But do you think that women have a complicated relationship with raising funds? I say this as someone who personally moved from being a salaried person to now being an entrepreneur in the media space. And the one thing that paralyzes me is asking anybody for money. I walk into a room, I can ask them the toughest question, I can cover a war, I can report a riot, I can cover COVID pandemic from across the country. I can do all of that, but I cannot ask anyone for money. Do you find that this happens to other women? Tell me that I'm not bizarre, or tell me I'm not the only one. Rupa.
No, I think you're not the only one. I think it has to do with the social conditioning where women tend to be more self-critical. They also tend to underplay their achievements. And this is something I'll come back to in a bit. But before I do that, I think there is an issue at the investors' end as well. Because if you look at investors, if you look at entrepreneurs, globally, study after study shows you that the entrepreneur profile reflects or mirrors the profile of the investors. So investors tend to invest in people like them, people who go to the same schools, who are part of the same networks, and so on and so forth. So I think, therefore, unlike other parts of the financial services world, the startup investing community, I think the gender balance is disproportionately skewed towards men. So I think it begins with starting by changing the gender balance in the investing team itself. That is something we, for example, are emphasizing considerably. You see far too few women in VC investing. And I think when that starts changing more significantly, you will also see a shift in the profile of entrepreneurs who are funded. But coming back to your question, I think I think despite the strides that women have made and their phenomenal achievements, if you look at a presentation or if you have a conversation with a woman compared to her male counterpart, it has been my experience that you actually have to really dig in to pry out what her achievements have been, because it doesn't come. They hold back, I feel, from
Yeah.
showcasing what they.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But some great talking points there, and let me go straight to Upasana. Upasana, you had some experience of being in a traditionally all male domain because you started off in the engineering space. It's not as unequal today, as it used to be, but it's still pretty unequal. Do you agree with Rupa that the main problem is the way investors look at women, because the investors are mostly all men? They're a bunch of suits, so to speak. I shouldn't be calling them suits. I need to go to them to raise funds, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been a lot of discussion on this topic globally, and specifically for American investors, people talk about the fact that everyone wants to invest with it's a white male boys club, and I think that it's not just that in New York and Bay Area. I think it's same all over the world, and I think it's no different in India. Um, it's very difficult for not just a woman but also a self-made person to be able to get funded, because generally investors are looking for references or connects to, oh, did you go to my school, did you go to IIT, or did you go to Harvard,
Yeah.
or whichever school I went to. So it's very difficult to break through. I do think that things are turning around, but whether it is from a business space, investor space, government space, I think that there is clearly still a lot of discrimination at play, and one must rise above it to move forward. But I don't think, Barkha, that asking for money has something to do, with a person's sex. I think it is
Yeah.
difficult for both males and females to ask for it. but the conviction and confidence to go to meeting after meeting and tell your story, your company's story, and to command money in terms of investment only comes from the fact if you know that you can take it from X to 10x, and in order to get to 10x you need some sort of investment which you don't necessarily have in terms of your own monies. And I think that a lot of that is driven from the business idea and your team motivating you that yes, we have achieved some level of success, but to get to next level we need to raise money. And I think that as more women, I see a lot of women now becoming founders of early stage companies. I do hope that they will move forward and scale up their businesses and will not get caught up in traditional or these social conditioning norms per se. I think we have to strike our own path. There is no book that is going to teach women
Sure.
how to do this. The paths are going to be slightly deviant though, and not similar to what their male peers have set up.
So, what has been the toughest for you in your entrepreneurial journey, Upasana?
So in terms of fundraising or just in general, in terms of the overall journey?
I mean, since you're making the point that it's not men or women, everybody finds it difficult to ask for money. Maybe it's about confidence. I actually don't agree. Like, I tend to reject most gender generalizations. But the one thing I find is that more women than men are uncomfortable asking for money. And it doesn't have anything to do with confidence. It has something to do with feeling like either your equality is lessened if you ask someone for money, or feeling very boastful. I think these are the kind of cultural trigger points. I don't think it's necessarily to do with confidence. So I'm just wondering, for you, what has been tough? Like, is there a moment you can look back and say, oh my god, that was so bloody tough?
Um, I think that the so I've been as you pointed out, I've been an engineer myself. So my biggest thought process is that strategy is one thing, but execution is key. And I've been fairly execution focused, which is driving myself and the team to excel and scale up the business. I think I learned a little later in the game that not just doing well on financial metrics and growing the business is important, but knowing people, going out and setting up meetings, meeting people and telling them about your business, not just investors, but the who's and
Yeah.
who of your market or your space, or for that matter, even the media sector, is very important because it's not so much about boasting, but if I'm not going to be confident talking about our marketing, my brand and my company and how we are going to create an impact in India, then who will? And I think that is also something that I find doesn't come very easily, especially to people with engineering background, or non-marketing backgrounds. That has been one difficulty that I have now finally overcome in the last 2-3 years.
Yeah. Yeah, talking about yourself is always weird, right? And yet that's the name of the game. Rashmi, I was seeing a comment on my screen as I get your story, and we can bring up that comment about solopreneurs, like that basically that solo that people who are individuals who set up to form a company, they don't really get funded. And if we can take that to Rashmi and bring up Rashmi, what was your journey like as you set out to start Fresh Menu?
Yeah, I think the solopreneur question, I think I've addressed it too many times, and I think VC industry is obsessed with questioning single founders that why are you single? While there are tons of multiple co-founder companies where founder conflict is one big reason why things don't take off. So yeah, I think it's a question that everybody has to take on. I have now been a solopreneur for the last 6 years. I think I have learned to take it in my stride, but it's a tough question to address all the time.
So, what do you think? Do you think that when you look at Rupa's figure of the 8 million entrepreneurs who are women to the 50 million who are men, where do you see the bias? There clearly is a bias. I mean, we can't hide from the fact that there's a structural bias in how women-led companies are funded.
I'll tell you a story, okay? So, as a student, I aced all exams. I had 98 in my 10th board and 99 in my 12th board maths. But even today, in every meeting, people would challenge your math skills, your P&L skills. They would doubt that you know your business model, unit economics. People have wanted me to solve some on the fly, mathematical numbers for them to believe that I really know it. So I think, and this is after all the probably the IMDb, which is the best for people to say, okay, you're top of the net. I think there is a challenge in how people estimate what women are capable of. I've been asked questions like, how far is your daughter's school? Who will drop her to school? So how does it run? And do you have help at home? Which I don't think any man would be asked, how much time is he going to do?
Yeah. How do you respond when you're asked that?
I think you have to some nonchalance on your side, but
Yeah.
there obviously you have to, as an individual, I would choose, with whom should I really pursue the conversation and with whom not, because if the bias is obvious, then it is very hard to pursue the conversation.
Yeah. So I want the three of you, you all three of you have been on these endless webinars where you are taken through the structural questions about your industry. What I really want to do, and we've been doing this the whole day on this global town hall, is to get to know you as people, right? What have been your personal struggles? What makes you angry? What keeps you awake at night? So Roopa, I want to come back to what you said about, how when you started out, there were no bathrooms in spaces that you went to. No one had thought of the fact that women might work there one day. And, this is so familiar across fields. I mean, in the courts of India, there are debates around why there aren't separate loos for women. My mother, who was a journalist, brought me up telling me the story that when she went to apply for a job to the Hindustan Times, she was told that women are just there to cover flower shows. So structural biases are there, have been there, and the politics of bathrooms, the fact that our public spaces are not made for women. When I was traveling, Roopa, across India reporting the pandemic, I got used to taking, if you want to go to the loo, you go in the khet, you go in the field, you go behind the tree. Because the fact is, our cities, our public spaces are not made for women. There are no loos anywhere. So the politics of the bathroom is a metaphor for this structural discrimination. Can you speak a little bit about that and connect it with your own journey? What was really tough for you personally?
Yeah, I must preface all my comments by saying that I've been singularly fortunate. Number one, in terms of the organs I worked in and the kind of work that I did, right, which automatically didn't expose me to too many of these kinds of situations. And the second, Barkha, I think, is the time at which I entered the workforce. It was just on the cusp of the liberalization era. And I think that my generation particularly, the kind of see in our careers from the time we started to the time we will end, that delta, I think no generation before us. I think in ways my career was a child of the liberalization era, and therefore I think it's important to call out these things upfront. Having said that, I would say that we were also, because we were pre-liberalization children, we also kind of took a lot of this in our stride. I don't think we questioned that much. I remember after graduating from IIM Ahmedabad, I was just about in that frame of mind, grateful that someone gave me a job. Because that was the whole thing, that was the era in which I'd grown up, so to speak. So I think in one way, I think it sounds so naive 30 years down the line. But in another way, I think it made us all very resilient. We took things in our stride, we went with the flow, we didn't kind of let ourselves get bogged down by this endless questioning about everything, and we just kind of went for it, So I think, it cuts both ways. Sometimes I think too much knowledge and too much awareness is a dangerous thing as well. So I didn't suffer from any of that. But I also think, I must call out what liberalization did to India, and therefore it made possible companies like CRISIL to be born and to flourish. Before that, when you thought about a corporate in India, it was all about of the promoter, for the promoter, by the promoter, right?
Yeah.
And then you had a company like CRISIL, Infosys, all these companies which came up, which were widely owned, It was they were professionally managed. I remember people telling us, "Arey, rating to kya hai? You'll be getting one phone call from Delhi and giving a rating." The
Yeah.
fact that people could have independent opinions was not even considered possible. And from there, I
Hmm.
think, to come up with to build an organization where all that matters, both the power of your analysis and the power of your ideas, was very liberating. Was very liberating. I think it was a very non-traditional workplace. Now, coming to the gender part of it, we took great pride at that point in saying it doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman. And I think in my career it reflected, because I rose all the way from analyst to CEO. We went public, we were a listed company, all of that. But today, when I look back, I'm not so sure that's the right attitude. I think it's okay to say it doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman, but my own thinking has evolved to say that it does matter, and you do owe it to women, to kind of provide them a boost and get them a lift. Just neutral enough. So you have to be, it's not about equality, it's about equity. And I think that has been my own evolution as a person and recognition in my own journey. So if you had told me 15 years ago, I would have argued vehemently against reservations on boards. Today, I see why that is required.
Yeah, I'm so fascinated listening to you because I think it kind of mirrors my own evolution in terms of disowning my gender and then recognizing that that is something complicated. And I think exactly like you, that we were tough, we didn't think too much, we just got the job done, we didn't spend so much time thinking about a gender. And then you get to a point, and it usually happens as you grow older and you see so many different things and you realize that it's just not a level playing field. And Upasana, let me take that to you. Do you think there's a generational difference in how these questions are addressed? Have you, as a female entrepreneur, adopted workplace policies that perhaps if your company was led by a man would be different? And if you have, give us an example of those.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, let me first summarize to, what you said and Rupa said. I agree with that, we have this thing about, oh, we are women, we will make it happen. That's great. But why should it be any harder for women than it is for men? And not every woman has the same personality. I mean, for every Barkha Dutt, there will be 10, perhaps meeker journalists who might get, riled by the level of assertiveness that a male boss might, imping on them. So I do think that we shouldn't make it harder for ourselves. We should live in reality. And I think the newer generation perhaps is appreciating this better. I mean, I can tell you that both my parents, have been teachers with professors. So at some level, while my family is very supportive, at some level, when my mom tells me that you need to do more for your kid, I remind her, why don't you tell your son-in-law? Why are you only telling me? Because I remind my mom that unlike you, who had a morning to 2 p.m. teaching job, I have a full-time job, and sometimes my day doesn't even end by 8:30 because I have some US investor call going on. So I think that we have to build a nuanced setup which really, accommodates women and does not require them to sleep for 4 hours to make up for everything else in life. And in terms of, yeah, I think women-led companies, do operate differently. As an example, in the current framework, while there were several startups in the Gurgaon area that tried to reopen their offices and perhaps have opened them since May, June, or July, I put my foot down and said that we will not be opening any office and we will be working fully remotely until next year, because there were already 4 or 5 employees whose parents had reached the ICU by then. So what is the point of imposing more danger? And I told my management team that we should treat it as a gift to our employees, that you can work from your homes, but you have to work equally hard because we have to recover from COVID. I'll come to some
Yeah.
even more exclusive things that I have done, and I want many others to do. That's why I'm talking about them here. So in our we have a fairly large office in Gurgaon, and I have a 5-year-old now, and I realized that it was extremely challenging for me when my child was 0 to 2 years old, or even 0 to 2.5 years old, to be able to do my work with focus because I was constantly worried about him. So I found a small area in our office, and we made a creche or a daycare happen, so that all my young women engineers leads started coming back from maternity leave fast enough, and their kids were right in the office, in a secluded area in the office, and we actually hired 2 3 nannies to take care of their kids, so that they could also work, feeling more comfortable that their kids are right there. They can visit them 2 3 times in a day to see if they've had their milk and not sleeping and all of that.
Yeah, yeah. So, you know what? It's so interesting, some of the things you've said, Upasana, because you said that when your mom tells you, guilts you on work-life balance, you say, why don't you tell your son-in-law? And then you tell me about this creche for your women employees. And I'm going to push you on that and say, why don't you have a creche for all employees, male employees
This
also, so that men also take their part in bringing up children and it isn't just a woman's job. You know, I've been harping on this equality at home theme all day long.
No, no. So, Barkha, I am a tough taskmaster. Believe me, my husband is also my co-founder, so he has to share the load. And
Okay.
during COVID, when we had absolutely zero help, if I was, doing the dishes and making breakfast, then he was making lunch and dinner. So we made sure that we do all of our bit. And you're right, the creche is not just for kids of women employees; it is for kids of all employees, and that is how it was set up. Because I also read a great case study about a company like Patagonia that did it in the US, which has increased their employee stickiness by 25% just because of creating this small setup of a daycare within the office.
Yeah. And there's also the larger politics, right? Let me take that to Rashmi. I mean, I remember Melinda Gates, I was interviewing her once, and she said, the the Gates Foundation has moved from maternity leave, and there's great value in that fight that feminists fought, to family leave, because we need to start having conversations about, what happens at home, including bringing up children, not just being a female responsibility. Rashmi, do you want to come in there? Although I'm seeing a question that's the opposite of what I just said, saying, wouldn't it be a better strategy to have longer maternity leave? I actually think I personally prefer family leave, but I don't know how all of you weigh in on that. Rashmi, go ahead.
No, I don't have, I think, a personal take on, what leaves would be better. But I think every individual needs to decide on how they need to raise and how much time they need to put to it. I think the longer maternity leave has been a blessing for women, but I think in a lot of jobs it gets used against them, because I know that a lot of people ask women questions about, so are you planning a child, and they would not hire women who are about to get married or who just got married. So I think some of these policies do come in the way of recruitment, and that's a bit of challenge. But I think it needs a lot more education and communication, that we are all here for a marathon career. We are all going to work for our lives, and a couple of years of maternity and break and paternity leaves are not going to change the game for anyone here. So I think the larger question is a lot more education, but I know it works against women with more policies coming in favor for them.
What has been the toughest thing for you, Rashmi, since you've spoken about the kind of questions that you've sometimes asked by potential investors? Being a woman, what has been the toughest thing for you?
Um, I think the toughest thing was building conviction in your own self, because a lot of times you challenge, what's so special about you, and can you really do it, and can you deal with all that it comes along being an entrepreneur or even a working professional. So I think early years the
Yeah,
struggle was, do you really want to build on, and do you really want a career, or you're just doing job for some money.
yeah.
While being an entrepreneur, I think the amount of ambiguity and uncertainty that you deal with, are you really prepared for it? And it is not like, you make money on day one. It is a pot of gold probably at the end of the rainbow, and none of us know, how far it will take there. So it needs a lot of passion and commitment to go through the highs and lows of entrepreneurship. So I think it is the challenging part is, really building that conviction in your capability, waking up every day that I really can do it. So yeah, I think that one.
Yeah. So we've got about 10 minutes left, and I want to just look at some numbers again and take final comments from all of you. I was particularly struck by Rupa's own changing positions on, affirmative action in boardrooms. And I just want to throw some numbers out at all of you. This is, of course, the pre-pandemic number, poverty number for women. But if we can actually go to the next set of graphics, which is the Index of Women Entrepreneurs 2019, this does not actually reflect well on India. If you look at this and just hold that in the Index of Women Entrepreneurs, 52 out of the 57 surveyed countries. Okay, so that's not a good record. Out of the 27,084 recognized startups in India, only 43%, if we can go to the next slide, only 43% have a woman director. There it is. Look at that number. Only 43% have a woman director, just a director on the board. And this is despite people pushing for more diversity on boards. The sixth economic census released by the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation says that women constitute around 14% of the total entrepreneur base. So we're still talking very, very low numbers. And the fact that on the Index of Women Entrepreneurs, India is still ranking just 52 out of 57 means things aren't good. Roopa, what led you to start thinking that maybe it is time to look at some sort of affirmative action in terms of blocking board seats? How did it come to you? How did it come to that for you? And because the problem is that those women will forever be labeled. And if we were one of those women, we would resist taking a position on a board through that route, right? Wouldn't we? All of us here, I think. So it's really complicated.
Yeah, I would make a difference between startups and say public listed companies. In startups, I think the concept of board, particularly in the early stage, is basically founders and investors. It's not a curated board. So let's keep that aside for a moment. There are other issues with startups. So when corporate boards are concerned, I do think that the SEBI guideline, which now requires listed companies to have at least one woman director, I think that's a guideline. Yes, initially, as we saw with the panchayat reservations, initially it is the wives and sisters and mothers who come on the boards. But even there, you do feel the weight of the position. And once you're put in that position, I feel people rise to the occasion. I love telling the story about this woman in a panchayat who was who became the sarpanch, and on Republic Day, when she went to unfurl the flag, she found there was no one there, and people said, "Oh, the men came, the elders came, they hoisted the flag, and they've all gone back." And she said, "No, it is my job to do that." And so she summoned everybody back again and went through the ceremony all over again. So putting people in those positions actually makes a difference. And I have seen that happen. 5 years ago, if someone called me and said, "We want you to be a woman director," I used to bristle and bristle. Today, I actually think I owe it to women to accept that role and accept even that label with pride. And I don't get annoyed anymore, perhaps because I feel also that in the stage of the life that I'm in, I feel I don't have anything to prove. So I actually I don't push back, so that's been a little bit of my own evolution. I've also seen, Barkha, if you just go out as a board and say, okay, let's look for new directors, because if you go by networks, you will tend to get men. But the moment you bring in a search firm into the picture, look at the slate of candidates, you will see a whole lot of women on that list. And so I do feel that intentionality about these things is very, very important.
I think that's a great point, because it's a little bit like seeing these manuals at conferences, right? You've got to make a conscious effort to go and have more diverse spaces, and sometimes even all female spaces, because the balance is so tilted the other way. But we had an interesting question on affirmative action, and I'll let Upasana take that if we can bring that back up, about the efficacy of affirmative action. Has affirmative action ever really worked? Well, Roopa shared the interesting story of that panchayat leader. But Upasana, where would you come in on that? Like, would you want to go along with a kind of policy? It's a guideline, Rupa's right, but tomorrow if it became law, would you welcome that there should be X amount of diversity, gendered diversity in a boardroom, on boards? Would you agree with that, Upasana? Can't hear you, Upasana.
Sorry, can you
Can't
hear
hear
me?
Upasana. Now I can. Yes, go ahead. Now I can.
Sorry, I was going to. Okay, so yeah, I was saying that the affirmative action in terms of women directors is, I think it's a step in the right direction. But like Rupa said, sometimes it ends up being family members, which I don't think is really helpful. While some of them may rise to the occasion, some others are just signing, whatever their male peers are telling them, which is not very helpful either. I think that from a overall women participation point of view, I think right at the top of the funnel we have a problem, because while I saw the stats you presented in terms of leadership and startups and
Yeah,
directors, I think the number of women working in India, as I had read last, is about
yeah.
30% of women end up in the workforce. Remaining drop out after education or after working for a year or two.
It's
So
much lower. Just I want to correct you on that. We're now under 27%. It's not even 30%. And I was saying in the introduction to this panel that 20 million Indian women stopped working over the last couple of decades. So, we have fewer women working Upasana today than we did in my mother's generation. That's what the data actually tells you. There's a decline in the labor force participation.
that's
And
so
and
bad. That's like,
Yeah, of course it's bad. And the other thing is that poorer women have to work, so they do. But in what sociologists call Sanskritization, as families move up the economic ladder, they tend to become socially more conservative, and you see fewer women working. Maybe their home pressures, social pressures, cultural pressures. But there are few. Our labor force participation when it comes to women is actually on the decline.
yeah, so I was trying to make a point there that there should be an overall requirement in terms of participation of women. And plus, but on the same hand, it can't happen that there is a demand pressure but there's no supply. So I think a little bit of it boils down to the fact that what are we teaching girls in our families? I mean, I think their purpose in life can't be to just get married and make babies. There has to be more towards purpose in life, whether or not they are equipped financially. Having financial independence should be, I think, the number one underlying factor in raising up a child. And I think that is the root cause of the problem. There is just too much social conditioning against women working, regardless of whether it is a simple typist job or a teaching job, whatever might be their area. We need more women working, and only then we can expect that there will be changes in terms of women leaders, women founders, women directors. I think just the top down thing will not work in terms of putting diktats of percentage of affirmative action in terms of you need actually directors.
I agree with you like 150%. And I just want to get Rashmi there and then we'll wrap with Rupa. I think Upasana makes such a great point that the premium we put on economic self-reliance for women and women working, and that work. Okay, there's a good question on the screen, and that's another politics which says, shouldn't you monetize housework? Why aren't you putting a monetary value on housework? And I think that's fair, but I think what's not fair is that it's mostly women who are expected to be homemakers. And when we get to a point where there are many male homemakers, let's have that conversation. But as long as it's women who are pushed into that role, or who even think they're doing it by choice, there's so much structural conditioning that goes on. So Rashmi, this point about the labor force participation actually declining, fewer Indian women working. What do you say on that?
I kind of agree with what Upasana said. I think it needs both top down and bottoms up approach. I think a lot of it is a conditioning where women are told that, hey, your income's not enough for you to work
Yeah.
hard and you should sit back at home and enjoy your life. So a lot of it is being seen as some additional income versus, an identity creation or opportunity for life that gets missed.
Yeah. Did I just lose you there? I can hear you. Go ahead, Rashmi. Okay, we just lost Rashmi there, so I'll end with the last word to Roopa on this. Then I go to close. Roopa, when did we reach this point where we stopped driving home the need for women to be economically self-reliant? I think that's at the heart of this, right? So socially and culturally, it is okay. It is not okay for men to not be economically self-reliant, and it is okay for women to not be economically self-reliant. And nothing is going to change among investors in companies, outside, inside, wherever, till we change this.
Yeah, Barkha, so, the female participation in the workforce, I mean, that statistic is horrific. What is
Yeah.
even more troubling me is that I think no one has quite understood why it is so. We haven't
Yeah.
unpacked that number, and I would certainly, encourage journalists. I would encourage researchers to do a lot more work to figure out the why behind it and the segmentation. I just don't think beyond that headline number we know enough. Until we know enough, I think we will not make progress. Secondly, I don't know whether I would agree with you, Barkha, when you say when did we lose that. I think in certain segments of the population, it has actually increased. I mean, you look at professional courses, for example, engineering, MBA, medicine. Of course, for a long time, the proportion of women is increasing. In the classroom, in the corporate world, the proportion of women is definitely increasing. And I'm struck by the fact that the kind of family support, at least in the metros, that working women get today, from people, from their parents, from their in-laws, from the larger ecosystem, saying go out and work, and it may be out of necessity, but increasingly not out of necessity. I think there is a recognition of the fact that women need their space and their identity. It may not be in as much of the population as we would like, but I don't think it's entirely gone. I am amazed to see women in the workplace today who, within 2 days of having a baby, are back on their emails at midnight, and I say, "Oh my goodness, what's going on here?" But it's
Yeah.
inspiring because they are driven. So I'm a little more optimistic. I don't think we've lost it.
Okay, let's end on that optimistic note. I think the thing is that people to look up to, women to look up to, are so important, and to look at Rashmi and Upasana and you, Rupa, and across generations. I think that's the interesting thing here. Is what makes this real. And maybe I'm just playing a downer on this, but I just do get exasperated when economic self-reliance and professional passion is not at the heart of the gender dream and the gender conversation. Thank you very much for being part of the We the Women Global Town Hall. Upasana, Rupa, and Rashmi, keep shining, keep going for your dreams,
Barkha, you
and
should
keep
ask.
encouraging. Yeah,
Barkha, you should ask
yeah.
Karina to make more movies where she's encouraging women need to have a job. I
I
think
did
that will
ask
have more
her.
impact than
That's
any
a good
government
point.
policy.
That's a good point. But at least she made the point that she's working through a pregnancy. She was back on the sets after like 4 days after she got married. We did debate a lot of stuff about sexist movies, but you know what? Everybody in their own spaces has got to put this at the heart of our lives. What would we be without our work? Like, I just think that every day, that take anything away from me. But if you take my work away from me, like, I would shrivel up and die. And I just wish we could, do what we love and get women to do what we love. And anyway, thank you. There's never enough time to have this conversation. Thank you, Rupa, Upasana, Rashmi. Bye, and catch up soon. Thank you, guys.
Thank
Thank you.
you.